Hello and welcome to Dotting the I and Spaceship. I'm Bob and this is episode 4. This is part 2 of my look into what aliens might really be like. The only reason that I wanted to do this kind of an in-depth look at what aliens could maybe look like and why they might look that way is because even if you break from convention and you have aliens that are all cephalopods or insectoids or whatever, if you've at least thought about why aliens look the way they do, what else might be on their planets, I think you ultimately create a more diverse world, which is more believable and creates more immersion for the readers. So today I'm drawing on the work that I put into the last episode, which was a really long, dry, boring, maybe, look into life on planet Earth from 3.5 billion years ago to today, and what shaped humanity specifically from first single-celled organisms to, bipedal, ground-dwelling, tool-using clowns. Before I get into that, there's a few things. I'm trying to do the podcast without writing a script for it, which is much harder than writing a script for it because I have to think about what I'm saying and not say too much. We'll see how this works. Last week, it took me 7 hours to write the podcast and then an hour to record it and another hour to edit it. And if I could cut that down to just an hour of recording and an hour of editing, I'd be really happy. But I can't afford to spend 7 hours a week writing out I think it was 8-page document. Ultimately, what that means is I'm going to make a few more mistakes. I'm going to sound a little bit stupider, which means you're just getting the real thing, I guess. I have written up a brief sort of podcast format for me to go through. It's still a work in progress. So before I get into the main topic for today, I want to talk about last week. Last week I wrote a story called Mayday, which is about a man who wakes up and finds himself in a spacesuit in the middle of space. Actually, I don't know if I gendered that character, so it could be a woman. I don't know. It's a male because I'm a male, I guess, and that's how I think of characters that have no gender. Well, characters that don't have a defined gender, I guess I default to males. Anyhow, I reviewed the movie Mortal Engines, which came out last year on Wednesday, and my Patreon exclusive story is a story called The Rain, which is another Frank Mason story about Frank going off and looking at some of the dirtier underside of Ceci, the planet that he lives on. My prompts for next week are a story about the desert, just because it's a juxtaposition on the last story that I wrote about Frank Mason, which was the story about The Rain. I'm going to do a review of the movie About Time from 2013, starring Domhnall Gleeson, Rachel McAdams, and Bill Nighy, which is it's a fantastic love story that has time travel in it. And my Patreon exclusive for the next week is a story about it's going to be a fantasy story, so it'll be the first fantasy story that I've put up on the site, about a guy who creates stories using magic. So the big topic for this week is alien physiology. So there are a few points that I really want to hit on from my long rant that happened in the last episode. The thing is, everything that's on the planet today is just as evolved as every other thing. The microbes that are in your gut that are working to break down your food is just as evolved as you are. That old line against evolution with why are there still monkeys when there are humans? That's because monkeys are not the thing that humans and monkeys come from. So what I'm saying is the human is just as evolved as the crocodile, and just as evolved as the bird, and just as evolved as everything else. So we have had just as many opportunities to be evolved into this form as everything else has had to be evolved into the form that it's in. There are really mammal-specific things that we have that other things don't have. But they have all happened in the last 50 million years. So things like external pinnae, which have only evolved once as far as we can tell. No other animals have ears like ours except for mammals. Snakes don't have ears. Jellyfish don't have ears, which is probably why jellyfish don't listen. So nothing is objectively more evolved than anything else. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people don't think about when they think about aliens. They think about something which is, had considerably more time to evolve than us. Well, physically, we're just as evolved as we were 200,000 years ago when the first Homo sapiens started walking on the planet. The difference between us and a Homo sapien 100,000 years ago is that I have the benefit of the product of the agricultural revolution and all of the revolutions since, and they probably know where the water is. That's the difference. Those guys know where the water is. Me, I'm screwed. I'm just wandering around the bush looking for water, I guess, in that scenario. If I go back to his time, if he comes to my time, I know where the water is. Haha, take that, random guy from 100,000 years ago who would probably not be in Australia because there were no humans in Australia 100,000 years ago. Okay, let's move on from that topic. As a subset of the point that everything is just as evolved as everything else, one thing that I at least tried to put into that long diatribe from the last episode was the concept of convergent evolution. In in the history of life, we see over and over again things that do similar jobs end up looking really similar. As the evolution is an iterative process, and so as it goes about its business, the most efficient thing is the most successful. So whales, for instance, are mammals. They, at some point, way, way back, long, long ago, in the gone befores, they were a land-dwelling creature. And so are dolphins, right? All mammals evolved on land. And so the mammals that have gone into the water have become, hairless and super streamlined, and, so make them as fast as possible in water and as energy efficient, because energy efficient is a big thing here, of big importance. We see pterodactyls use a membrane-like wing, which is the same way that bats fly. It's the same way that, flying squirrels drift down, where they've developed a membrane between their forelimbs and things. Given enough time, things that live, like, there's also, I think, ichthyosaurs? Whatever, I'm not remembering it. But there was a dinosaur that's definitely a dinosaur that's not related to mammals that looks exactly like a dolphin. And we see that over and over again with a bunch of things. Things that do similar jobs end up looking the same because evolution finds the way to make them look the same. So there's no reason why an alien on another planet couldn't have a different strategy than we have. There's no reason why mammals in particular should evolve into a human-like intelligent creature with the ability to build tools and go to space. When I'm talking about aliens, I'm not talking about single-celled organisms that might be kicking around on like Enceladus or Titan or something. I'm talking about aliens that we can talk to in a fiction book, kind of like the ones that H.G. Wells imagined. Actually, I don't know that Isaac Asimov definitely were kind of like the ones that Isaac Asimov was putting in that came from Venus or Mars, even though he knew better at the time. I've got a book from the early Asimov series. I don't think it's currently in print. I don't know. I picked it up at a recycled bookstore. And it's a fantastic series because it categorizes his early stories that he sold to magazines. And in that he says, yeah, okay, I wrote stories about, the Venusian aliens having certain traits and the Martians having certain traits. And I knew full well at the time that there wasn't creatures on Mars. We knew that in 1964 or whenever he was writing those first early stories. God, it had to be earlier than 1964. I'm showing my age. It was definitely in the 40s because Isaac Asimov's PhD was put on hold to work for the Navy. Anyway, okay. So, part 3 of my things to consider with alien physiologies. So the physical characteristics of an intelligent spacefaring species has to have some stuff in common. It's very similar to the way that NASA and SETI are looking at. So one of the things that they want to do, I'm not sure if it's one of the things that they're going to be capable of doing with the James Webb telescope, but definitely one of the telescopes that they're putting up soon-ish is going to have the ability to actually look at, to do a spectrum of the atmosphere of planets that of exoplanets that we've discovered. And that way they can look for specifically free oxygen, because we know that free oxygen doesn't exist in massive quantities unless it's created by life. As far as we know, there is no mechanism other than life that makes free oxygen and emits it into the atmosphere according to, chemistry and stuff. I'm sure once they start looking for it, they will find a way that happens, and it will make the SETI people even angrier than they normally are. Because every time the SETI people look for radio waves or something, they find out some weird quasar makes radio waves that pumps out prime numbers or something. So every time they think of something like, an intelligent species would make this kind of pattern, they look for it, they find it, they go, yes, we found it, and then they work out that it actually could probably be a natural thing, and then it makes them very sad. But right now, they haven't found a way, as far as I know, to get free oxygen into the atmosphere of an exoplanet in large quantities, like 21% like it is in Earth's atmosphere, except for life doing it. So what they're hoping to do with one of these telescopes that they send up is they're hoping to take a spectrograph of the actual atmosphere of some of these planets and look for free oxygen. And if they see free oxygen, they're going to say, we're pretty sure that life is on those planets. And some of them are pretty far away. So, some of them are like 20 light years. But I forget how far away the TRAPPIST system is. I mean, personally, I think it would be a massive waste of time to use that kind of hardware to check out the stuff in the TRAPPIST system. I don't think there's life in the TRAPPIST system, which, if you don't pay any attention to space and you don't remember that far back in time, I forget which telescope it was. It might have been, it might have been Gliese. I don't remember. Anyway, with one of the satellites that they sent up was designed to look for life, and well, no, it wasn't. For those of you who aren't, massively geeking out on all science news, you might not remember this, but one of the telescopes that they've used to look and find exoplanets found a system around a red dwarf that had 7 Earth-size-ish, I think they're all a little bit bigger than Earth, planets, and 3 of them were in the Goldilocks zone, that area where there could be liquid water. And it was in the space news places quite a bit when it happened. I don't think there's life on that planet because the TRAPPIST star is really quite small. It's a red dwarf, which is it's the smallest type of star, and the planets are all really, really close. So the planets are so close, it's like we're talking about a year being days or weeks that were really close, and that meant that they would actually be tidally locked to the star, so only one side of the planet would face the star at all times, so the day would be the same size as the year. Orbitally, that happens when anything is too close, right? So that's why you see the same face of the moon all the time. It's because it's tidally locked to the Earth because it's so close. There's a little bit of a wobble, but not a lot. It also happens with Mercury. Mercury is tidally locked to the sun. So you have one side of Mercury which is super, super hot, and the other side which is super, super cold. Now we don't know if those planets have moons or any of those sorts of things that might be orbiting, or because a moon-sized or bigger than a moon-sized moon around one of those planets could have water on it, and it would, revolve around the planet, and therefore it wouldn't be tidally locked to the center star, although it would probably still be tidally locked to the planet. That could maybe have life on it. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. The planets that we discovered in the TRAPPIST system that are tidally locked to the star, which have one side of the planet getting utterly murdered by, electromagnetic rays and the other side in complete darkness, are not great candidates for life, in my opinion, because you don't have tides, you don't have, like a really good... I think one of the important things for creating life is a really good movement of energy. So if you've got, tides, and you've got periodically erupting, volcanoes that erupt and create, hot, warm water for a little while that cools down. It doesn't get too hot. It does, as it cools down, it creates some stuff. I think that's sort of the area where we're talking about creating life. And so I don't think TRAPPIST is a good candidate for that. It definitely wouldn't be a good candidate for, going and visiting, because there'd be some really, there's some places you could live on the dark side and probably build solar panels that peaked around the day side to power a colony like that, but it would be rubbish. So it would be rubbish. You'd have a really hard time. You'd have stuff, but you have stuff anywhere. So why go all the way out there if you're just going to effectively build a space-based habitat? Why go all the way to the TRAPPIST system when you could just build it, on Mercury? Maybe they have. Maybe I can write a story where they've done that already. Anyhow, I haven't even actually got to point 3. So point 3 was, there are certain characteristics that I think aliens should have, and by no means is this going to be necessarily an expansive list, but these are the ones that come to mind when I was formulating sort of my rules for how I'm going to write aliens. One of the things that I think is pretty important is, in order to become a spacefaring nation, you have to be a nation that can, sort of follow the same path that we have. You have to have tool use. You have to be able to control and command fire. You have to be able to develop, those tools until effectively, a spaceship is a tool. So in order to be a spacefaring alien, I think you need to be a tool maker, and tool makers need to have hands. So I don't necessarily mean like the pentadactyl style of hand that we have, but an alien needs to have the dexterousness to do everything we can do. So they need to be able to pick up any tool that we can use, and maybe they have a different configuration on their hands. But effectively, they need to be able to create fire with their bare hands if they need to, like we can. If we use rocks and stones and things. They need to be able to command tools on their planet in order to be able to build a rocket ship to inevitably fly to Earth to check out and realize that we're actually not all that interesting. They also need to have senses. You can't have a blind, dumb, deaf, mute alien. I don't think they necessarily need to have all of the senses that we do. They certainly don't need to be in the same spectra. I've written aliens that can see much shorter sections of the electromagnetic spectra that we see, but maybe they see it with more definition. The one thing that I will say about that is the light spectra, coming from the point of view of someone who studied spectroscopy, the light spectra that we recognize as visible light is visible light for a reason. It's visible because it can interact with chemical sensors in your eyes. that can then be turned into electronic information that's sent to your brain, there's only a certain spectra around, so aliens they can see that have a light sensing organ are probably going to have a light sensing organ at least around. Like they might be able to see some, like more of the infrared or more of the UV spectrum, but an alien that can see X-rays means that they have evolved in a place that has so many X-rays at such a concentration that they've developed a biological organ to detect it, and X-rays aren't good for biological organisms. So if you were to, for instance, create an organism that can see X-rays, like Superman, I didn't try to do that. I didn't try to get to Superman. I just apparently rocked up there. So if you created an alien that can see X-rays, they need to have eyes they need to have grown up in an area for a sufficient amount of time. We're talking a period of history of like 50, million years, at least, where there were so many X-rays that it was a benefit to their evolution to develop that. So that would mean that they would probably be, immune. You have to make some way to compensate for the fact that if there was a massive, gamma burst that covered the world in X-rays for 50 million years, like a, relatively close but not too close supernova, or some like a nebula igniting or something that could do it. I don't even know what could do it. But if there was something that did that in the history of that alien development, it probably would have just killed everything off. It probably would have been a mass extinction that murdered everything. But if you have an alien that can do it, then you should think, obviously some portion of the aliens on that planet have a natural defense to radiation, because not only can they see it, but it can't harm them. Because if it could harm them, they wouldn't be able to withstand 50 million years and the hundreds and thousands of generations that you need to withstand that kind of barrage for evolution to happen. So you can be different, but that's my next point. I'm getting ahead of myself. Graspers and sensors, I think, are pretty necessary. I think big brains are pretty necessary for aliens to have. We've got, in comparison of our brain mass to body size, our brains are massive. They're doing a lot of work, and that's why I can record a podcast on technology that has been developed over the last many thousand years. You don't think about computers as necessarily taking thousands of years to develop, but computers couldn't have been developed if the other industrial revolutions hadn't have happened. So everything that is around us is developed by the magic of thousands of years. One thing that I'll say about big brains is humans have big brains, but the cost to having big brains is that we have premature births. So humans, realistically, we shouldn't be born as young as we are. We're born as early as we are because if we're any later, we can't be born out of the birth canal. All right, because if we were fully developed, our brains and our heads would be much bigger and we'd get stuck. And so we're being born earlier and earlier to compensate for the fact that we can't get out if we stay in for a full gestational period. So that's why baby monkeys can climb straight away. They've got muscles that can do that. Our babies can barely breathe and can't even open their eyes in some cases for ages. And they certainly don't comprehend what's around them or where potential dangers could be. So the human gestational period should probably be closer to 2 years, because around 2 years you've got, a creature that can... Sorry. At around 2 years old, babies are near the development that we see other animals on Earth being at birth. There were too many ats in that sentence. I think big brains, we would probably see big brains in aliens. It's not huge, but you would probably see... in all species on Earth, you see that you have a defined head, because that decreases the time for sensory data to get from the sensor to the brain to be interpreted, that it makes sense that other aliens would have heads. And then if they have heads and a concentrated brain organism, then it probably would be at the top in order to get rid of all the extra heat, because brains make tons of heat. Even in the smaller animals, brains make tons of heat. I'm definitely getting sidetracked without having a script. Oh well, hopefully it's good listening and not too hideous. I'm still in point 3. Physical characteristics. I've talked about big brains. I think aliens would have big brains. That doesn't necessarily mean that they would look like, greys from the common culture where their brains are the huge, massive, dominant things. There's a substantial difference between brain size in men and women and a substantial difference in brain density in men and women. And all the studies show that that doesn't actually affect intelligence. Men and women think differently and do different stuff, but we're not that different. If you've got big brains, they could be denser, they could be bigger. All you need is a different heat getting rid of mechanism. My God, I'm a wordsmith. One of the other characteristics that I think you'd see from aliens would be sexual reproduction, because I think sexual reproduction is probably what led ultimately to multicellular life, and certainly it seems to be fairly important for eukaryotic cells, since every eukaryotic cell, as far as I know, I'm not a biologist, but as far as I know, every eukaryotic cell reproduces with sexual reproduction instead of asexual reproduction. So I don't think that's a coincidence. I think the ability to scramble genes but within a subset of what's allowed, rather than just try to do a direct copy, is much more efficient at finding evolutionary options that maybe weren't available to things that try and keep the genes as rigid as possible. Which is why bacteria have never developed a multicellular thing. I mean, you could make the argument about maybe algae or stuff. Eukaryotic cells did it 3 billion years ago, or whatever. I don't have my notes on what I wrote down before, but 2.5 billion years ago at least. And in all of life, as far as I know, there's no prokaryotic cell that has developed a multicellular capability. And I think that has something to do with sexual reproduction. I think the development, the option to create a limited set, so it keeps high fidelity information, but within a limited set to allow for sort of targeted genetic mutation. So what I'm saying is, I think you would have at least sexual reproduction in aliens, and that, if from the point of view of story, leads you to many options, because you could have sexual reproduction produced in other ways other than the way that we do it. That said, in Star Trek, sexual reproduction with other aliens and us can often produce hybrids. I don't think that would ever happen. I don't think you would meet an alien that has developed for billions of years on another planet and it would be sexually compatible with human genes. I think there's a huge variance of genes between the species on Earth. Lobsters have 200 genes. Humans have 46 genes, and apes have 48. The processes to change the number of genes we have make us genetically incompatible. We can't breed with other hominids like the great apes, because the genes is too varied. Because we would be giving, 23 genes in our half of the reproduction. They would be given 24, and so it wouldn't zip up particularly well. I mean, not that couldn't happen, but what I'm saying is I don't think that alien-human hybrids is a thing that will ever happen, at least without significant scientific advance. I'm sure there would be some methods or some adaptation to CRISPR where you could take specific genes or change the way that, you could maybe do it in a lab and then use in vitro fertilization to create a baby. Like, maybe that could happen. But just to be randomly, without any assistance from medical science to be compatible sexually, I don't think that's a thing. Man, I'm terrible at keeping on topic. So the last point, in point 3, is that humans are not the physical dominant form of life. Humans have many predators. Many predators. We can be eaten by islands. That's terrible. We can be eaten by lions. That's way better than islands. Well, I guess. Getting eaten by islands would probably be better. But anyway, we can get eaten by lions and tigers and, everything, oh my. So there are plenty of things on Earth that are significantly stronger physically and better adapted than us, right? Cats can see a better version of the spectrum than humans. Dogs have better smell. Pigs have better smell. There are lots of animals on Earth that have a better physiological adaptation to living on Earth, and our way to adapt around our physical limitations was intelligence. And I put to you that any other alien life that we find will be the same. That the only way, I think this isn't supported by anything that I've read or I've just been thinking about it, and I think that intelligence is a trait that is developed by evolution. And if that's true, and we're here and we know evolution exists, so we can pretty much say, yeah, no worries. If that's true, then other forms of intelligence should be the same. We should see aliens from other planets where on their home planets, at least while they were developing, there were significantly stronger predators on their homeworlds. Alright, so we're at point 4 of alien physiology, which is, could it be different? So what I've said, to sum up, I guess, is that I expect that we would see some kind of alien that has the ability to sense similar senses to us, that they would have hands that's as capable as our own, they probably have big brains, they probably have some kind of sexual reproduction, they probably could get eaten by lions, and so they probably don't look massively different to humans. If we look at sort of convergent evolution, even though there's only one type of human to look at, there's more types of humans, but even though there's only one form of intelligent life that we know of on Earth that was smart enough to be able to go to all of the places and potentially develop human space travel. I mean, we have developed human space travel, but go to the stars space travel. It's likely that we would see aliens that had similar characteristics to our own. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean Star Trek aliens that look, exactly the same with forehead ridges. But it does mean, we would see creatures that at some point in their past, because they're not the dominant form of life on their home planets, we would expect to see that, they're not super strong. Or if they are super strong, that the creatures that exist on their planets are mega strong. So everything's sort of in relative, I guess. If life developed on other planets with other mechanisms and other challenges to get over, I mean, just looking at my rant from last week, things that affected the development of life on Earth were things like asteroids. There were things like tectonic shift. There were things like, I think the first... the Ordovician mass extinction is theorized to be because there was a huge uprising of carbon dioxide-free stone out of the water that absorbed all the carbon dioxide out of the air and caused a massive ice age. So things could, if life had grown up on Mars and then everything dried out, and the atmosphere poofed off the way that it did. It's very possible that life is still on Mars, and that has developed to, solve its problems, because we know none of that happened particularly quickly. So, life could exist on arid or frozen or methane or Venusian planets that are fiery and hellish and have volcanoes and sulfuric acid atmospheres. I think that's entirely possible, and if aliens did develop on those planets that changed, then they would have different characteristics, but they would still follow that, the physical characteristics that I talked about of, if they're spacefaring, they need to have hands. They need to have the ability to understand the environment around them and to be able to conquer the basic environment and change their environment to their will. So I've been recording for about an hour, which is pretty good. And I'm sure once I cut that down with editing, it will hopefully be less than that. I'm sure if I just cut out the ums, it'll probably be down to 20 minutes. If you want to contact me to send me a story prompt to challenge me to write one of my flash fiction pieces, you can email me at contact@robert-lynch.com, or you can tweet me at BobLynchBSC. You can also check out my work on my website, which is robert-lynch.com. And if you like the podcast and you want to get some exclusive stuff that I don't put out on my website for free, you can check out patreon.com/robertlynch and look at some of the extra tiers for people who want to sling me a little cash. Alright, I'll see you next week.